Are you letting the fear of rejection hold you back in life? Have you ever abandoned your true self in hopes to fit in or avoid getting hurt by other people? Are you stuck in a cycle of self-rejection and people-pleasing? Well, if so, this is an episode you definitely don't want to miss. Welcome back to Full and Thriving, the podcast where we dive deep into what it means to live boldly and reclaim your life through mental healing and personal development. I am your host, Meg McCabe, a certified eating disorder recovery coach, community founder, retreat host, and speaker who has spent the last decade helping other people reach mental healing and build a better life for themselves. In today's episode of Full and Thriving, we explore the topic of rejection with Shannon, a therapist and founder of Trauma Dump LLC. Catchy name, right? Shannon shares her personal journey of self-rejection, people-pleasing, and how she abandoned her true self in a desperate attempt to avoid rejection. Together, we explore how attachment styles shape this fear of rejection and the key steps to healing from relational trauma. If you've ever struggled with the fear of rejection or rejection sensitivity, this episode is for you. Let's get started. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
I forgot how much we loved it.
We were going in on the Cheesecake Factory because you live near it, which I'm very, very jealous of.
I could basically walk there. It's like right down the road.
Oh my God.
Wait, what's your favorite
like?
cheesecake again?
Oh, what is it? Like the Adams peanut butter cup?
Yeah.
Is that what?
I know that one by heart.
Like, oh, by heart. You go by heart. Do you know the menu by heart? Like, do you know?
Oh, I've read not the whole menu, just the cheesecake menu.
Okay.
But they've gotten rid of the 30th anniversary cheesecake and the chocolate hazelnut cheesecake, and I am crushed.
That's devastating. I'm so sorry for the loss. And we need to petition, is what needs to happen.
I'm going to go marching up to them and be like, I want some 30th anniversary cheesecake. And they're going to be like, ma'am, it's the 35th anniversary. I'm going to be like, I don't freaking care.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I seriously get behind that. Like the 3D Doritos, I signed that petition. When they took away the BK chicken fries, signed that one. And McDonald's snack wraps, signed that one. Where are they? Where are they?
You have to use your voice.
You have to. Absolutely. That's so
Wait, I didn't even know they petitioned those foods. That's amazing.
Girl,
you're just such an activist.
Oops. Could you imagine? I got on you. I introduced myself. I'm like, hi, I'm Shannon Wynn Dube, which is weird because I never use my married name. I'm Shannon Wynn Dube, and I'm an activist for fast food delicacies.
We're bringing fast food back, like all the forgotten ones, all the lost ones. You know, I'm trying to think what if I could sign a petition for something to come back right now. I think I would get on that Doritos one. I need to keep tabs on.
I think it worked.
Did it work? Did you get any?
I don't think I did. I think that I may have dropped the ball because I was like all gung ho. I was like, I'm going to sign this petition. I'm going to take time out of my day. And then they came back and I was like, oh, okay.
Nice. You made a difference.
Yeah. It's just one day at a time.
I love it. Well, I'm excited. I think I need to get some cheesecake later today. I'll get some in your honor.
Please do. Please think of me. Is that your favorite? Like the 30th anniversary? That one's like, what do you do now that it's gone?
I'm in a weird internal struggle about cheesecake at the moment because I used to have like a few fallbacks. Like I like the s'mores flavor, but sometimes it disappoints a little bit because it doesn't have as much stuff in it. I like the chunks of stuff.
Oh, yes.
So like it doesn't have enough chunks, but sometimes I like it a lot because it has the graham crackers and the marshmallow. So that one's kind of up there. But I went so out of character and got the coconut one.
The coconut.
There's like a coconut cheesecake, coconut pie cheesecake or something like that. That one looks so boring. It's all white. It looks like it's going to be like the most boring choice you've ever made. And then when you have it, you're like, this is phenomenal. This is so good. And so that's the one that I've been ordering, but it doesn't reflect my typical order at all.
It doesn't reflect my need for Chinese.
Yeah, it doesn't make me feel like myself. I'm like, who am I? Like, am I boring now?
Existential crisis.
Yeah, I'm like, am I boring? Because I'm not getting like a chunkified cheesecake, but
that reflects some pretty serious internal struggles. And I know. I love that we're in Denver right now. And I'm like trying to like psychoanalyze this. Or
psychoanalyze away.
Minimalistic, right? Like minimalistic is in. Like we don't need all the frills. Maybe that's the reframe, right?
We don't need the frills.
I'm a maximalist, so like I don't relate to that, but I think that it could apply. You know what I mean?
I like the idea of not needing the frills.
Yes.
I think one thing that I also like the idea of is focusing on the flavor and not the frills. Like quality.
Yeah.
Over I don't know what the right term would be, but like quality over maximalist type vibe, even though I think I would be more of a maximalist than a minimalist. I'm kind of in the middle.
You're like a good
maximalist cheesecake girl though, usually. So it's a swing in the other direction, but you should try it.
Yeah. I knew that I liked you. Like I saw your social media and I was like, who is this girl? Like I fucking love her. Oh, I was like, I need to be like one with her. So like gotta figure this out. And so you being like, I'm a maximalist cheesecake girl. I'm like, yes, thank you. Like if you came here, which I think there's a place, like my husband's favorite is like the classic, which couldn't be me. It couldn't
be classic. Oh my God. That would cause me a conflict inside. I'd be like, who did I marry? No, I'm just kidding.
Who am I married to? Like, this is what was I thinking? No, love him to death. But like, I'm like, what do you do? Like with all of this on the menu, this is what we're choosing. Like, I don't get it. But like, yeah. I don't know. I'm a hater, you know? Like
I would feel that way too. My thought is you can get that cheesecake anywhere.
You can get that Thank you. That's so validating.
You're welcome.
So when he listens to this, it's gonna be like, no, it's true. So like, I don't vibe with that. Like the plain Jane, like it couldn't be me, you know, like, cause you could, like you said, you could get it anywhere, but they have so much on the menu that like, you really gotta, like, you gotta go hard. You gotta go hard.
You got to go hard. And I don't go there that often. It sounds like I do, but I don't go there. I've gone there a lot over the years. I've tried so many of the cheesecakes multiple times, but it's not like I'm going there all the time. So when I go there, I got to like seize the moment. Although you can take cheesecake to go. Like you can just drop in and order over the counter, which I've done.
Of course, because that's the best idea. The problem is I have like an hour drive home. So like, is that food safe at that point, you know?
I'll get you, if we ever meet in person, I'll buy you a cheesecake. I'll put it in a little cooler and I'll drive it to your house. I got the Adams fudge ripple, or what is it called? Peanut butter. It's like the Adams peanut butter cup.
Yeah, it's like something like that. It's like Adams something.
Yeah. I'll get that. I'll put it in a little box for you, and it'll be Scout's honor as a thank you for being on my show.
Oh my God, you do not have to do that, but you will forever. You will become my favorite person on this earth. You already kind of are. If you did that, like if you showed up with a cheesecake, like I got it's so funny, but my business coach came the other day and we were like budgeting, which like I didn't do before I started my business, which like apparently you should. Oops. And I knew it was going to be a shit show. Like she was going to get into my finances and be like, what are you doing? And she did. But like in order to like, you know, get make her more comfortable, I like went to this cannoli place down the street. We have this like cannoli. It's like so good. It's called Mariano's. Like they have a cannoli truck and they like always park outside of like Yale and like they go to different events and like all of that. And they're like, it's like a shoreline delicacy. And I was like, here you go, have the cannolis. So if you bring the cheesecake, I got the cannolis and it'll be a party.
Oh,
it'll be a party.
Yes.
Like key lime cannolis, like s'mores cannolis, literally delicacy.
Oh,
It's
I
so
love cannolis.
Wow. I just love sweet foods, you know?
Me too.
Like, you will rarely find vegetables in my house.
I try. I told you I have gestational diabetes, and the diabetes educator was like, "What's your goal for the next month?" And they talked about vegetables, and I was like, I guess I'll increase my vegetable intake. And like they were like, "That's a great goal."
Like when you have to give your dog a pill, like, and you wrap it up in like stuff like peanut butter. That's literally me. I'm like, hide it. Like my husband's like the cook, and I'm like, hide it from me. Like I don't want to know what's in there. Like give me the vegetables, but like I don't want to know. Like
they have to be cooked in or like finely chopped or something like that. Yeah. Wrapped in cheese, some sort of cheese on top. Yeah.
That's
hilarious. I love that. Hey, tis what tis. Being diabetic, they ask you to just eat a lot of cheese, basically. It's great. Lots of cheese and nuts. And
really?
Mm-hmm. I'm like,
so like charcuterie boards are like on for you.
Sort of, except for as a pregnant lady, you can't eat like certain meats.
Oh, I heard about that.
Or certain cheeses. But I don't even know. I just gamble sometimes, I guess, and it all works out fine.
Yeah. That's literally so valid. I just take a gamble.
I'm just taking a gamble. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is on the good list, like for what I'm supposed to have. But anyway, we gotta get going. We gotta talk about stuff. So we gotta think about cheesecake.
Yeah.
After this again, if we want to. But let's focus in.
Let's focus. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm like clearing my throat.
You like
all right. Well, hello, Shannon. How are you doing today?
Hello. I'm doing so well. I'm so excited to be here. And like, this is round 2.
Yes. This is our second whack at trying to record this. We had some tech issues before, but we're staying true to our chosen topic, which is focusing on fear of rejection and overcoming fear of rejection. I know Shannon has a personal history with this. I have a personal history with this, and we're just gonna go for it. So Shannon, can you please share, before you share your personal story, could you share a little bit more about who you are as a professional?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a therapist here in Madison, Connecticut. I'm down on the shoreline. I'm the owner and founder of Trauma Dump Psychotherapy. I don't know if you can like see behind me, I have my little neon sign. So that's my practice. I started it earlier this year and it's kind of taken off a little bit on social media. And I really do specialize in treating trauma, disordered eating, and any really co-occurring disorders to trauma. So eating disorders, OCD, anxiety, depression, you name it. So that's where my heart is treating trauma.
I love that you picked that name because it shows your personality. It's a little funny. It's different. And your logo is a dump truck.
Okay. Imagine the conversation that I had to have with this designer. What are they called? They're like, they're designers. Like they're graphic designers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, hear me out. Dump truck. Make it aesthetic. Put a brain in it. Like, okay, like Sounds good. She probably thought I was the craziest person in the world, but it came out so good. Like we had to do a few edits, but she like nailed it. And so yeah, my logo is an aesthetic dump truck with some pretty cursive writing and with the brain in it. I don't know.
I love that for you.
Yeah.
I think that's partially why I gravitated to your social media page, because I was like, who is this person? She has a dump truck logo. It's called Trauma Dump. I need to know more. So I found you. I realized you were in Connecticut. I was like, this is amazing. Let's have her on the show. So that's why we're here. Well, I love the formation of your business. That sounds like a really cool way to get started. I'm curious about your upbringing and how fear of rejection was part of your life growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question because I think, a lot of times we think of fear of rejection and we think of it as kind of more acute, right? Where a lot of our childhood stuff and the way that in our upbringing and how we grew up so informs how we navigate rejection and abandonment and criticism and judgment. Like all of that is so important to the full picture of like what's happening in the here and now with our kind of issues with rejection. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be a session or a podcast with me if I didn't trauma dump a little bit, right? Like my namesake kind of entails. So my upbringing was pretty rough. It was pretty rough. I grew up in a lower socioeconomic status with a lot of addiction in my household. My dad suffers pretty tremendously with addiction. So, and he's still in active use to this day, unfortunately. And there was a lot of domestic violence between him and my mom. And there was a lot of abuse towards me as well. It was just me. So an only child. My mom and I really kind of living in a really rough environment with someone that is tremendously unwell. My dad's been incarcerated. So there was a lot to my upbringing. And I think that kind of shaped, because the way that we're spoken to as kids really, really becomes our internalized dialogue the way that we speak to ourselves, and I really wish that more parents understood that and like really kind of were able to self-reflect. Unfortunately, mine were not. So the way that I was spoken to in kind of during my dad's tirades and really violent episodes really did become the way that I spoke to myself. So I kind of had an anxious attachment style, an anxious avoidant, I would say, but overall insecure attachment style because of that really chaotic upbringing and really traumatic upbringing. And I think that because I felt so rejected in the relationship with my father, I started self-rejecting. I started self-rejecting and then projecting that outward, right? By assuming that everybody else was going to reject me in the same way that I had internalized my dad. And so then enter all the people-pleasing stuff, right? Because if you're making them happy, then they can't reject you. But then you're kind of, you engage in a lot of self-abandonment. And I think that's where I kind of fell, where, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my needs were. I was just kind of, this entity that served to please others because I was so terrified of feeling rejected or criticized or judged.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I think you are so right. I think how parents talk to their kids get so internalized, and there was not a lot of education around that for parents, especially like our parents' generation, the generation before that. And, even if there was, some parents wouldn't have cared probably. And it does inform our internal world. And I find it very interesting how, you were constantly feeling a sense or actual rejection from your dad. And then you started self-rejecting. So can you explain a little bit more about what self-rejecting is and what that feels like inside? And how does that connect to the people-pleasing component in the world?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, for me, the self-rejection came from a place of internalized negative core beliefs about myself and the world, right? So when we experience trauma, it alters our entire mindset, and we start kind of adopting these narratives in order to make sense of the trauma and the world that we live in, relating to that trauma. So I think that there was a real sense of internalized belief that I had of, you're not good enough, right? The people that are supposed to love you unconditionally don't, right? It's very conditional. It's based on sobriety. It's based on, well, did you quote unquote provoke him, right? Like it's all of that kind of wrapped up. And I think, so you kind of start to feel, I don't know, like not good enough. And like everybody is unsafe, right? And that I'm not going to be safe with other people, right? And that I need to kind of watch my back. And so I think that whenever we kind of experience a traumatic upbringing, kind of like what I'd gone through, we internalize those core beliefs, and then it kind of ties into rejecting of ourselves, because we have such negative stories that we tell us about ourselves in relation to the world, right? So I think that, how that ties into the people-pleasing tendencies is just that, because there was so much rejection, because there was so much criticism, there was so much, I'll name it, so much abuse, that like I lived in constant fear that everybody else was going to abuse me, because I thought that I was undeserving of love, right? Undeserving of positive support. So I think that it became a survival instinct to fawn, right? People please in order to maintain safety in relationships.
Yeah, I was just going to say it must have felt like a protective measure you had to take to live out in the world. And so I want to like fast forward to college, because I know that was when your fear of rejection and people pleasing reached a low point, right? I know a little bit about your story. I'd love for you to share kind of the point where it got really bad and how you were able to bring awareness to that and start to break free from that.
Yeah. I think college was weird. Okay, Meg, college was weird. Like in society, we totally like glamorize the college experience, but for a lot of traumatized individuals where like it's your first time really away from home, and like you're like, and you've built it up your entire life because you're like, hell yeah, I'm getting out of this freaking hellhole of a house. Okay. Thank God I'm going to get out. I'm never going to go back. It's going to be amazing. And then you build it up, and then you get there and it's like so stressful. Like you don't know anybody. You're like just trying to survive. Like college was weird. Okay. And I think that it's specifically, we know kind of in the research that we know that people that have experienced trauma are going to be activated and triggered by transition. What's a bigger transition than leaving your familiar zone and going into a kind of an unfamiliar place, right? Like even though I found myself, craving familiarity, even though my familiar was abusive, right? Like I wanted to go back home, and I was so deeply confused by that, because I'm like, home is shitty. Why am I having such a hard time adjusting? Like this should be great. Wow. It's safe. Right. So, and it had been, there was a lot of change for me later on in high school, because I was bullied pretty severely. I think I shared this, but I was bullied pretty severely. Like I had my car keyed, I had it written on when I was sitting in my driveway, like really bad, to the point where I had to switch schools. And I remember the principal of the new school said to my parents, like, that she sat them down and she was like, you either switch her into a new school and you bring her here, and you pay for it, right? Or right, which wasn't the thing. I had to have extended family members and tons of parent loans and whatever. But she said, listen, if you don't take her here, you're going to be paying for it in psychological bills later in life, because it's a really toxic environment. And
Wow.
I really was like, oh my gosh, wow, like she stood up for me. This is the first time I ever really experienced that. So there was that transition, and then the transition into college. And I just remember kind of it starting therapy because I had really hit a low and I'd been through something pretty traumatic, which I think I shared, but I was in Boston and at the time of the marathon bombing, and not to get, I don't want to get too super deep into that, but I started therapy shortly thereafter. And I was like focusing on that. And then the bullying in high school, and my therapist was like, girl, you got way more than just this. Like you got way more than just this. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, are you sure? Like, I think it's just this. And then that's kind of where I realized that like, shit, I have a lot of work to do. There's a lot more, and sometimes you don't even realize what kind of trauma is happening for you until you're out of that environment, until a safe person can listen and reflect on your story and says and reacts to it. Right. And I had been surrounded by unsafe people. And finally I was in a setting where it was really safe. And her reaction to my story was like, that's not normal. And it felt so empowering and so validating. Scary, but really validating.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. I've heard that from trauma survivors that, when you're around a safe person, they'll reflect almost the reality to you that you didn't see as so bad, right? Like those reactions can be really helpful in getting a reality check on the environment you lived in or what you're used to versus what is like a respectful, loving way to be treated.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
And I think when you have that deep, like those internalized kind of negative core belief systems about like, I'm not good enough and people are unsafe and I'm unlovable. Like I've really found myself keeping people at an arm's length. Like I had people, but the connections were really deep level, meaningful. Like it was very like surface and superficial. And I think that can even exacerbate the trauma response even more because as humans, we need safe connection. We need deep connection to other humans, And so when I think there comes a point where that, you have to kind of engage in deepening those connections, but that's really hard to do when you've internalized this belief that like people are scary. The world is scary. I'm unlovable. I'm not good enough. Right. Like I'm like, everybody's going to reject me the way that my dad rejected me. Right. Like I'm not, I feel like whenever we have that belief system that we're not good enough and that people are, we're unlovable and all of that, like it makes it really hard to have like deep connection with other people. Yeah. And that exacerbates the trauma response even more because you're not getting that support and that depth in relationships and that connection. And really when your kind of trauma was in your relationships, your healing is going to be in those relationships, right? In other safe relationships, in deep connection. So it's hard when you have that fear of rejection and that fear of abandonment because it almost goes against what's going to be, healing for us, which is connecting,
Yeah. So how did you start to separate and distance yourself from this fawning mode that you were in? Like, what did you have to do to kind of let yourself be free from that so that you can build those real, authentic connections?
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh. My husband was really big in this, right? Like we had met around that time and we had started dating and he showed me kind of what safety was, right? And like, I think initially I was like a little bit scared, right? Because it felt real. And but being around a safe person for like really one of the first times, right? Like, that I was going to continue to make a connection with. Like I had my school principal, I had some friends, I had some parents of friends, but like people that I like planned on really maintaining relationships with, I think, he helped me see that like what I was, that like I can be loved for me and that I don't have to kind of put on a mask and be a chameleon in social situations. It's like, okay, like why don't we be who we are instead of try to be what others want you to be. Right. Like he was definitely instrumental in like meeting a safe person and meeting someone that was open and loving and wanting to get to know me for me was really like my saving grace, honestly. And I don't like to give him that much credit. Okay. Like he's going to listen to them. Like he's going to listen to this for sure. He's so supportive. He's literally iconic. Like he's a king. We love him. But like, yeah, he definitely was really helpful in that. And I think I also had my best friend too, who, we had grown up together. We were on the same bus together. And she had been there for me for a lot of things. And I kind of, again, I didn't love to get too close to people. And I kind of, would keep like, I did the push pull thing, right? Whereas like I would kind of get really, really close and then it would be scary because we'd be so close and so connected. And then I'd distance a little bit because it'd be scary, right? Such a characteristic thing for people that have had that relationship trauma in their life with their primary caregivers. And I really, with the help of my therapist, she taught me that, it's okay to feel connected. It's okay to be, deeply connected to other people, and it's necessary. And so I got very lucky with the people around me, and they kind of were patient with me. And I think that's the key in healing is like sometimes we surround ourselves, we repeat those patterns when that's kind of your upbringing. You repeat the pattern and you surround yourself with people that are really rejecting because that's what's familiar to you. And our brain, our traumatized brain, it really is going to prioritize familiar chaos over unfamiliar peace, right? Yeah. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to surround ourselves with people that don't align with those negative narratives that we have in our head. That was so healing for me.
I love it. It's like you can keep chasing the familiar chaos and the rejection and the pain, or you can notice the cycle and find someone who brings you peace. And that can be so healing in so many ways. And while you were talking, I know that attachment theory is really connected to all of this. Could you explain maybe just illustrate simply how the different attachment styles would respond to rejection?
Yeah. And I really want to kind of clarify too, like rejection sensitivity is going to be normal for people with insecure attachment styles to a certain degree, right? Like I think people with a more avoidant attachment might respond a little bit differently to rejection because may not be putting themselves out there in a way that would open them up to that rejection. But I think, when we're talking about fear of rejection, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there is this kind of fear of rejection, and then there's rejection sensitivity, otherwise known as RS. You'll see kind of abbreviated in the research. And rejection sensitivity is really that, that anticipation that I'm going to be rejected. And the reaction to that rejection is going to be extremely dysregulated, right? Like it's going to impact mood. It's going to impact the way we go about social relationships. I think it's natural and normal for humans to crave a sense of belonging and acceptance in peer groups, right? So we're going to naturally fear rejection, but then it does cross over the line into rejection sensitivity when our reaction to that rejection is so consuming and we're almost swept under by the waves of emotion that comes with being rejected and abandoned and criticized and judged, right? So that rejection sensitivity, I think we see a lot in insecure attachment styles, but the way that it kind of manifests in anxious, avoidant, anxious alone or avoidant, or, it might be a little bit different in the way that it presents, but I think there still might be rejection sensitivity there if we have an insecure attachment style, period.
I'm so glad you articulated the difference between those, because I think you're right. Like there's probably people who completely take rejection and turn it into this big, overwhelming, horrible experience, drawing a lot of meaning about themselves and judgments about themselves and spiraling down. I hadn't known that that was different from just normal fear of rejection until you brought that up. So I appreciate you articulating that. When it comes to securely attached people, I just like to illustrate what's possible for people. When someone is secure in their relationships, how do they navigate attachment? Like, what does that, or how do they navigate rejection? I just want people to know what a healthy way to respond to rejection looks and feels like in case they're totally disoriented by, or in case they're totally like living in a world where this has never been a reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I think honestly, people can't relate, okay? Like to the people with the secure attachment. Couldn't be me, Meg. Couldn't be me. But I think that, it's shitty. Like no matter what, rejection's shitty. Like let's just name it. Let's just normalize the heck out of that, right? Like if you have a secure attachment, I think that what will happen and what I see in people that do have secure attachments is they're able to navigate and move through and trust in their capacity to manage the reaction to rejection, right? Like there's a certain level of like, I can move through these feelings and I can trust that I can be okay moving through these feelings. I think when we talk about rejection sensitivity, right, with people that have that, and maybe it comes from, or it's attached to, insecure attachment styles, that rejection is going to feel earth shattering, right? So I think people with secure attachment styles, it's less earth shattering and it sucks royally, but it's something that we can move through without being swept under by, which I think is a big differentiator.
I think you're right. I am guessing these individuals also don't personalize it so much. Like right. they might be able to say, oh, you know what? This is not a reflection of me. This is a reflection of how they're feeling today, or maybe they had a bad day, or this just isn't the right choice for them. And so not making it into it's my fault versus it could be something they're going through that I'm not aware of. And I think that's a lesson I had to learn in my own like attachment journey and my own fear of rejection journey was whenever I was rejected, I would just make it all about me. Like, oh, this is my fault. I did everything wrong. They must not like me for all these reasons, blah, blah, blah. Where like, as I got older, I started to observe, hey, this person's always moody and always treats me like shit. Or, you know what I mean? And then you're like, yeah, it's them. And then you start to realize, at least for me, I started to realize in like some of my negative relationships that this isn't always a reflection of me. And I think that's where the healing started, was when you start to recognize there's so much more to the puzzle than I'm the root of all of the issues here.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Stunningly articulated, iconic. Yes, it's so true. Right. And so we deeply personalize it sometimes, like, and it part of healing from it is learning how to not do that and learning how to say, okay, this is a reflection of them. And I think, too, another thing that makes rejection sensitivity so difficult to navigate is that it kind of, when you have rejection sensitivity and then you get rejected, it almost confirms, right? We take it as confirmation of all of those negative stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves in our
Yeah. So how would you say someone could utilize their inner narrative to start healing? Like how can someone do that?
Oh my gosh, you got to go to therapy. You got to go to therapy, like really targeting those thoughts, right? Those narratives and those core belief systems is going to be, it's going to be of utmost importance in healing, right? Like I really like kind of work on self-compassion, and I like IFS for trauma, right? Like I'm a big IFS person, internal family systems, for those that, want to look into it, just kind of learning how to coexist with all the parts of ourselves that are maybe were crafted as a way to protect, but are no longer serving us. But I like coming from a lens of like we have to resolve the trauma and we have to really, I mean, not necessarily resolve, we have to address it and so that it's kind of the trauma response doesn't spill into the rest of our lives. And I think as we heal from the root of the behavior, then we can kind of move forward in our relationships and be less ruled by fear. Right. And sometimes, and I think that that's worth mentioning too, Meg, is like, you know, sometimes the fear itself, like, I don't know about you, but like sometimes when you're really scared of a thing, like for me, it's the dentist. Okay. Like like the dentist, sometimes the fear of the thing, you know, like when I'm going to the appointment is like worse than the thing, you know?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think that like sometimes like people that really are sensitive to rejection will like avoid situations where they could possibly perceive rejection, period. And then they have a lowered tolerance for rejection and judgment and criticism when it happens. So like almost a little, I'm not saying we need to expose ourselves and go out of our way to be rejected, but I'm saying that we need to kind of find a way to feel more empowered going into situations where it might be present, right? And then if it does happen, it's going to build up our tolerance and help us build the skills that we need to move through it, you know?
So did you ever do that yourself? Put yourself in a place where you feel more empowered with the potential of being rejected?
Yeah, I think that for me, it was like letting people in. Honestly, it was like it was letting people in, you know, like.
So you had to consciously do that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like, and sometimes it would go to the opposite end of the spectrum too, which is like kind of hilarious if you think about it. Sometimes it would be like, I would nervously overshare my entire life story and like trauma dump, LOL, like my business, like I would trauma dump. And then like, I would be like, uh-oh, like was that too much? Like, oh my God, I'm too much. And then I would recoil and retreat, or I would just be super closed off and like, just focus on the person and their needs. Right. And I was like the fixer of my friend group. So I was like the mom of the friend group. It was like always the center, like the center of the focus was always like that person. And I was just kind of like self-abandoning and people pleasing, just like meet their needs and like pretending like I didn't have any, which isn't a great way to live. So I think that the work, you know, for me was learning how to identify my own needs and then execute getting them met, honestly. And instead of just pretending that they didn't exist and that my entire being was to like serve other people's needs, like that had to change.
I think that's so important. How did you do that? Like, at what point you're like, shit, I'm not paying attention to myself. I'm not giving myself love. I'm not giving myself my own needs that are important. Like, how do you move away from being the mom of the friend group? How do you sit with that discomfort? You know, the fixer, the one who's always there for other people, recognizing your needs matter. How did you start transitioning out of those roles?
It was slow. Like it wasn't a light bulb moment. For sure. Like, I think, you know, therapy sometimes is portrayed as like this, you go and then they tell you the thing and then you change the thing and then you're good. Right. But like, no, it took a lot of like my therapist, like it took a lot of work in therapy and also me being open to feedback in therapy. Right. Because I think sometimes my fear of rejection would come up in the therapeutic setting. And like, I would kind of be like afraid. Like I almost like if the therapist was doing something that like it didn't necessarily vibe with me, I couldn't articulate that I needed a different approach because I didn't want her to think that she was doing a bad job. That's like, I was so like the people pleasing was so ingrained. So I think that like I had to really learn to be patient with myself and, you know, really just be okay with the fact that like you have to be open to and want to work, you know? Yeah. And I think that for so long I was so afraid to do the work because I was afraid to open myself up even in a therapeutic setting with a safe person, right? Because I was like, uh-oh, right? Like then what am I going to do with this pile of shit that I have? Like, how am I going to unpack all of this? This is like a million suitcases. Like who wants that? Like, so I think that like, like that to like really like exercise self-compassion. And like I stayed persistent in therapy and I got on meds. Let's destigmatize. Okay. Like medication saved my life. It saved my life. And I think that I wouldn't have been able to sit in that setting and be vulnerable with another person enough to fix what needed to be fixed without the help of some sort of pharmaceutical, some sort of medication.
Yeah.
For me, it was antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication. And it really it really helped. And I think, doing EMDR on some of the trauma was helpful too. And, sometimes we need to we need some extra support when we're embarking on this therapeutic journey. And I think the biggest thing is like meeting ourselves where we're at instead of where we think we should be too. That's a big thing. A lot of times in therapy, I have clients that'll come and they'll be mad that they're experiencing certain symptoms, or they'll be mad that their trauma kind of was reignited by a certain situation. And it's, we have to kind of allow ourselves to be a human, and to have emotional responses. So I don't know how to, answer your question of like, how did I do it? I think it was more so like, it's more so I had to really learn to buy into the therapeutic process and not force myself before I felt ready, and find the right therapist. That's a huge thing.
I think you did a great job answering that question, because you brought up some really valid points, right? Like, it was slow. You had to get yourself into therapy. You had to be open to have it, using medication to get through the experience, and then self-compassion, which is really not easy to tap into when your entire life you've been abused, right?
Yeah.
So I'm impressed and happy to hear that you were able to buy into that therapeutic process and trust it. Yeah. Because some people just can't, or they refuse to trust the process, and you're living proof that you can do it, which is great. So I guess to the people who have that internal voice that's just berating them, rejecting them out of protection, like that inner voice that is just horrible, how do they start to buy into compassion and self-compassion? Because that feels like, when I work with some of my clients who have had maybe some abuse in their past, changing that inner narrative can be so hard. And feeling like you can connect to compassion feels foreign.
Oh my God. Absolutely. I know. You're absolutely right. And sometimes self-compassion seems like one of those like buzzwords where it's like, where it's like, like, if only I could be like, just exercise self-compassion. Like it's a practice. It takes time. Right. And I think a lot of times with my clients that struggle too with that, like that inner voice, that harsh inner critic, I like to say that, awareness of it is the first step, right? Being aware of what our inner voice is telling us in those moments, and being mindful and being present in our body enough to know that harsh critic is speaking loudly is really the first step. Because sometimes it becomes so normalized that we don't really even recognize that our inner critic is screaming at us on full blast, right? Like, and so you really, and when we learn and kind of learn to recognize it, and we become more aware of it, then we can intercept and say, something big for me was, whose voice is that? Whose freaking voice is that? It's not mine, because I don't value speaking to other people like that. Right? This is my dad's voice telling me that I'm a piece of shit. Right? That's not mine. Right? So I think being able to kind of be aware and that's hard. Being in our bodies is not necessarily a safe place for trauma survivors sometimes. So that is its own journey in and of itself. But once we kind of get there and we are aware of our inner thoughts while they're happening, and we're using those mindfulness skills or picking up on it, there's a lot of differentiation that is going to be really important. Differentiating, what is my voice? Right? What do I value, and how do I make my inner voice align with my values? Right? Versus kind of, my inner voice is speaking to me. It doesn't align with my values. I'm noticing that this is my abuser, right? That's their voice that I've internalized. I don't need that shit, right? And so only then when we are able to kind of name it, can we do some differentiating and really recognize that like bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless
really,
you.
Thank you.
Oh my God, you're fun. You have the cutest sneeze.
I had to hold it back because we're recording. I should have muted myself. But I don't want to stop the recording by mistake.
No, you got to do it. You got to sneeze. The whole conversation is like, we're human.
I didn't realize my cutest sneeze ever would be on this podcast, but there we go.
It was adorable. You got to keep it in. Got to keep it in.
But okay, so we got really sidetracked there.
We were talking about like getting in our bodies, using mindfulness skills, being aware, like having awareness of that inner harsh critic is like first step, and then being able to say like, that's not my voice. That's my inner critic voice, right? That's like my abuser's voice. Like, I don't need that in there, or how do I learn to coexist with it? Right. Like sometimes we may not, I think it would be really romanticizing kind of this healing journey if we said, okay, let's just up and get rid of our abuser's voice that's in our head. That's like that harsh inner critic that takes on their voice. Like, whereas really the work is, how do I freaking coexist with it? Right? Because it might be on full blast, dials turned all the way up. How do we turn it down so that our voice is the one that's really in control and really on full blast, right? Mm-hmm. That inner criticism might still persist, but that doesn't mean that it has to be on full volume, right? So I think that's something where a lot of times people will come to me and they're like, oh, I'm still being so hard on myself. Like, why is that happening? And it's like, well, you were conditioned for a really long time with this really harsh, abusive voice that was speaking at you. You internalized that because you're a human, right? Like, it's okay to we can learn how to coexist with that part of ourselves and not have it completely overtake us. We can have a harsh inner critic and not buy in to what the critic is saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's such a helpful reminder, is you don't have to just heal it away. Like, you could practice coexisting and building a life where you are kind to yourself and you honor yourself and you respect yourself. You don't have to necessarily respond to that inner voice. As long as you are aware it's there, you can choose how you want to respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And who we surround ourselves with, I think, is really important too. Like, I think it's a really radical act of self-care to be able to kind of distance ourselves from people that confirm those negative core beliefs that we have in our head. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, I think the more we surround ourselves with toxic people, the louder our own inner toxic voice can become, know?
Yeah.
Because they're igniting that flame a little bit. So I think we have to, part of the work a lot of times with my clients that have had similar trauma is like, what is a safe relationship? What does that even look like? Right? Let's just identify what that is and what is unsafe, and how do we create boundaries around toxic relationships that are not serving us and that kind of reinforce the negative core beliefs and the negative stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Like, how do we distance ourselves from that? And really, like, that's a big part of the work too. And it's a really, really important part of the work is like, surrounding ourselves with safe connection.
Such a valuable reminder for people too. I love how you mentioned in this interview, sometimes healing your attachment comes from and through healthy relationships. And I think that is a really great place to start, right? Is focusing on setting those boundaries and surrounding yourself with people who reflect the inner world to you that you want.
Yeah.
Right. So, I love it. So, Shannon, this has been a riveting episode. Thank you so much for joining me. How can people find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I am on Instagram. So I'm at Trauma Dump CT. So absolutely follow me on there. You can DM me on there. And then my website is traumadumpllc.com. And you can reach out to me through the contact form on my website. And yeah, I would be happy to kind of, I kind of go more in depth about a lot of these themes on my Instagram page. So definitely worth a follow. I also use a lot of humor in my practice because I'm a big believer that humor can help enhance connection, right?
Yeah.
And can be really healing in and of itself. So there's a lot of like, I post some funny shit. Okay. Not gonna lie to you on Instagram. So pretty good.
We love that.
Yep.
I think that's great. I think humor can heal, and it does definitely create that connection. And I think that's a helpful reminder that we can close out with. So Shannon, thank you so much for joining me. This was truly a blast. And I will be bringing you cheesecake one day when I make it down to Madison, and it will be in a cute little cooler and we can have cheesecake on the beach.
Oh my God, that is iconic. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, I'm excited to to continue working together and to get this message out there.
Awesome. You're very welcome. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
So there you have it. Another episode of Full and Thriving in the books. I want to personally thank you for joining me in listening to today's show. And if you found value in this conversation, I would be so grateful if you could please take a moment to subscribe to the show and leave a review. Your support not only helps us reach more people who are striving to live their most full and thriving life, but it also allows us to bring on even more incredible guests with valuable insights that can change your life. Every follow, every review makes a huge difference, and together we can continue to grow this beautiful community. Thanks again for being a part of the journey, and we'll see you next time on Full and Thriving.